Okay. I didn't hear the recording is in progress, but I'm guessing that means the recording is in progress. Okay. So we have, again, in the source sheet is in the chat box. Should be there already. Yeah. So the topic of today is Sudash Shlishit and its long lost cousin Malava Malka. Right? So we're talking right now about how to deal with is probably too strong, intensive a language. How we can best approach Shabbat during the winter time. So last week we talked about when the dinner, Friday night Kiddush and dinner is going to be so early. We talked about delaying it a little bit just to for a more reasonable time. That was last week. Today, I want to talk about another meal. And the meal that I want to talk about first is Sudash Shlishit, and then Malava Malka, which is a not as well-known meal that takes place at the end of Shabbat. So Sudash Shlishit can be a difficult one. Sudash Shlishit, of course, is this meal, this third meal that happens in the afternoon on Shabbat. So when it's the summer and you eat lunch at noon, you're done eating at 1, and then you only have Sudash Shlishit at like 8 p.m., that's not a problem. The problem is the challenge that we face during the winter months is that you finish lunch at, let's say, 1 o'clock, and the time for Sudash Shlishit is 4 o'clock. And so you've got 3 hours. They're like, you're not hungry. So what are you supposed to do? That's what I want to focus on right now. Sudash Shlishit, how to deal with, how to address Sudash Shlishit during the summer months. So we'll start with source number 1. It's the source, right? What is this mitzvah of Sudash Shlishit? So we have the source number 1. It's from Sefer Shmot, in the book of Exodus. Vayomer Moshe, Ichluhu hayom ki Shabbat hayom Hashem, hayom lom timtzeuhu basadeh. This is the manna has fallen from the heavens, and now everyone is they don't know, what am I supposed to do? What do we do with all this? What do we do? How do we handle this manna? And so Moshe tells the people, right, this is for you today. Collect this. Today is Shabbat. You're not going to have manna falling between Friday night and Saturday night. You're going to gather on Friday, and that manna is going to be what you eat on Shabbat itself. Right? So that's what the Torah says. Source number 2, the Gemara, the Talmud of Masechet Shabbat says this is how we know 3 meals. Tanu Rabbanan, the sages taught in the Braita, Kama Sidot Chayav Adam L'chol b'Shabbat, Shalosh. How many meals was a person obligated to have on Shabbat? 3. Rabbi Chidka says 4. If you find 3 hard to fit in, imagine Rabbi Chidka sitting 4. We don't follow Rabbi Chidka, we follow his first opinion, 3 meals. Arma Rabbi Yochanan, Ushnehem Mikra Achad Darshu. Rabbi Yochanan says, hey, by the way, where did they get this idea from? Both of them got this from this source number 1, this verse in Masechet in Sefer Shmot. Vayomer Moshe Ichluhu hayom ki Shabbat hayom LaHashem hayom lo timtzeuhu basadeh. The word hayom, the word today, appears 3 times, and the fact that hayom appears 3 times, those 3 times tell us that we have a mitzvah to eat on Shabbat 3 meals of bread on Shabbat. I'm going to post one more time the source sheet for anyone who just came on. So that's where we learned it from. And so this machlok, they both agree that it's that verse hayom tells us 3 meals. The only question is, do we count Friday night in it? Rabbi Chidka savar hanislat hayom levar mi'orta. Rabbi Chidka says it's 3 on Saturday, not including Friday night. Rabbanan, the position that we hold, ahadi de orta, they hold that the 3 meals includes Friday night. And so that's the source. That's the origin. This passage in the Talmud, source number 2, Masechet Shabbat. This is the origin of the idea of having 3 meals on Shabbat. So like we had last week, when we were talking about this, and we were talking about Kiddush, and we had a whole long conversation. What is the nature of the obligation? Is it biblical or rabbinic? That was what we talked about last week as far as Kiddush on Friday night on a cup of wine or a cup of grape juice. So here, the question is going to be, is this obligation to have 3 meals on Shabbat, is that biblical or is that rabbinic? And there's a reason to care, right? If it's rabbinic, and this is similar to what we talked about last week, right? If it's a rabbinic obligation, so then there's reason to be wanting to be a little more lenient because it's rabbinic, and rabbinic mitzvah we keep, and we keep very carefully rabbinic mitzvah. But when you compare a rabbinic mitzvah versus a biblical mitzvah, it's a lot easier to find a loophole to be lenient when it's rabbinic versus when it's biblical. So that's going to just be an important thing to keep in mind, what the nature of this, what the obligation to have 3 meals on Shabbat is. So
Rabbi?
Yes, please. Yeah.
A question.
Yeah.
But we say that the day begins the night before.
Okay.
So you you have to count the meal the night before, right? As one of the meals. I mean, why would he?
You're asking. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Why would Rabbi Hitka, mention? Well, he mentions 4 maybe because he's including Malav Molka. I don't know, but
so it's an interesting.
The first meal is Friday night because our day starts at night.
An excellent point. So you're asking. So Charles is asking, where is Rabbi Chidka getting, of course you should count the Friday night meal. Why is he not including the Friday night meal and only saying 3 on Shabbat morning, Shabbat on Saturday? That's an excellent question. My guess is that it has to do with the time of day that Moshe was talking to the people, that, they come out on Saturday morning and they see no manna and they're like, what's going on? And Moshe says, oh, don't worry about it. You have the food from yesterday, that's what we'll carry. But I'm not sure. It's a good question. What exactly is the motivation for Rabbi Chidka? It's a good question. Fortunately, we don't have to worry too much about it because we don't end up following the position of Rabbi Chidka. We only do 3 meals. So, but it's a really good question about the logic behind Rabbi Chidka's position. I'm not sure. I want to look into that a little bit more. But it's a good question.
Probably because of the usage of the word hayom. Whenever the word hayom is used, it's usually used to reference daylight.
Okay,
there you go. That's good enough for me. Hayom as opposed to just yom.
Vayhi erev, vayhi boker, yom echad.
Yom. Okay. We can have a conversation about this after. But it's a good question. Good question by Charles. Good answer by Chaim. We'll. To be continued. But so going back to the question here, is it a biblical or is it a rabbinic mitzvah? So the Levush, in source number 3, Levush, Rabbi Mordechai Yassi, 16th century Europe. He says the following: Zahir me'od. One should be very careful, lekayem sudat shlishi, to do sudat shlishi, specifically the third meal. Min haTorah gamken, and that meal is also biblical. Sheken darshu, because the Talmud teaches in Masechet Shabbat, because the word day is mentioned 3 times in the verse. The Talmud learns out the word day appears 3 times. That means 3 meals. Levush says clearly it's a biblical mitzvah. It's learned out from the language of the Torah. The Torah says the word day 3 times. That means 3 meals. Levush says we are dealing with a biblical mitzvah. So before you start saying, Levush says we're dealing with a mitzvah mideoraita, a biblical mitzvah, because it's learned out from a verse in the Torah. The Maharil, source number 4, another Ashkenazi approach, where Yaakov Molin, a little earlier, 14th century Europe, he suggests otherwise. He says, you should know, the Gimel Seudot, the 3 meals on Shabbat, Nami Durabanan. They're also rabbinic. There are a lot of rabbinic mitzvot on Shabbat. 3 meals is one of them. But the Talmud says that the word day appears 3 times. He says, asmachta. It's an asmachta. An asmachta is this idea that the rabbis came up with the rabbinic rule, and in order to give it a place to stand, so to speak, they connect it to a verse. They say, okay, they connect it to a verse. They're not saying that we learn it from the verse. They're saying we came up with it. But to give you a little bit of a place to sort of mentally hang this idea, we'll put it on this idea. The word hayom, the word day, appears 3 times. So that'll be an easy way for you to know that you have 3 meals. But we don't learn out 3 meals from here. We actually learn out 3 meals. It's just is a rabbinic mitzvah. So that's the idea. I want to pause just for a moment to recognize the presence of Rabbi Diamond. Thank you, Rabbi Diamond, for joining us. And nice to see you here. Okay, so we've established. I'm going to put one more time the source sheet in the chat box. So we've established right now there's a mitzvah of Sudat Shlishit, and we see right now that there is maybe you could say a little bit of a machloket. Levush, that first opinion we just saw, source number 3, is saying it's a biblical mitzvah, 3 meals including Sudat Shlishit. The Maharil in source number 4 is saying, hold on, you don't have to go so far. It's not necessarily biblical. It isn't biblical. He says it's rabbinic. Now, we still are careful with rabbinic mitzvot, but that's just helpful to keep in mind, according to the Maharil, that it is rabbinic. And most of the opinions that I saw when researching this, many opinions seem to go with the opinion of the Maharil in saying that the idea of 3 meals on Shabbat, which includes Sudash Lishit, were in the realm of rabbinic law, which gives us a little more leeway, let's say, when confronting various challenges with it. It's important to note, just source number 5 is the Aruch HaShulchan, Rabbi Yechiel Michal Epstein, 19th century Europe. So he says, he adds a little piece somewhere between the Maharil and the Lavush. He says, it's possible that it's not actually biblical, in like how the Maharil would say, that it's only rabbinic. Mikol makom, v'adai mitakanat Moshe Rabbeinu hem, sheken kibel misina. He says, nonetheless, it is certainly an establishment of Moses that he received from Sinai. The Aruch HaShulchan has said it's not rabbinic, it's not biblical, it's somewhere in the middle, it seems. It's a very significant rabbinic mitzvah. It's something that, I mean, he uses the language of Takanat Moshe Rabbeinu. This is an initiative that Moshe started, Shekibel Misinai, that he received this from Sinai. I'm not sure in my research, I didn't see where the Aruch HaShulchan got this from. I'm not sure if it's his own idea or somewhere else, but the Aruch HaShulchan is sort of giving us, it's not quite biblical, it's also not quite typical rabbinic, it's somewhere in the middle. So that gives you the idea that even if we're going to say that it's rabbinic, and we can say, okay, maybe there's room for leniency, the Aruch HaShulchan is going to say, no, even if you say it's rabbinic, it's a really significant rabbinic. And so we really want to make sure that we do this and we do this correctly. So that's the Aruch HaShulchan. And so even if you say, like the Mishnah Brura and various other contemporary authorities, that Sudash Lishit, the 3 meals, and certainly Sudash Lishit is a rabbinic mitzvah, we try very hard to make sure that we accomplish that mitzvah. Before moving on to content of the 3rd meal, any questions on this so far? Right, we've seen a biblical mitzvah, or it could be rabbinic, or it could be something in the middle. Now, what do we eat for this meal? The Rambam, in source number 6, Rambam is going to group all of the meals together, right? We've seen when the Talmud established 3 meals, it made no distinction between meal 1, meal 2, meal 3. All of them are talking about this one meal, like one type of meal. They're all learned from the same place. So Rambam, understandably, he says they're all the same. Source number 6, Chayav Adam le'echol Shaloshudos b'Shabbat. You have an obligation to eat 3 meals on Shabbat. Achat Arvit, Achat Shacharit, ve'achat b'mincha. 1 in the evening, 1 in the morning, and 1 in the afternoon. V'tzarich lizaher b'shalosh sudot elu. Shelo yivchot mehen klal. One should be very careful regarding these meals, not to eat anything less. Ve'afilu ani hamiparnes min hatzedakah. Even someone whose livelihood is from charity, they are going knocking door to door to get food for their meals, meal 1, meal 2, and meal 3. You can't just say, it's okay, Sudash Lishit, not that. Nope. This person has to have, even if they're living off of charity, so ed Shaloshudos. Then he adds an additional piece here that's important to keep in mind. We're going to come back to this. He says, V'im hayachole merov ha'achila. If one is sick from overeating, o shehaya mit'anet hamid, or one who fasts constantly, patur mishaloshudos. They are not obligated to have those 3 meals. So he gives us a little bit of an out. And he says, if you're someone who's always fasting, you don't have to have these 3 meals. And also, and this is going to be relevant when it's the winter time and you finished lunch 2 hours ago and now it's time for Sudash Lishit, Rambam says, if you're sick from all the food. So we could have a little bit of a conversation. What does it mean to be sick from all the food? You're overate. Rambam is saying you overate. You don't have an appetite. Maybe even more than you don't have an appetite. You're sick. The idea of introducing more food into your body is just nauseating. That person is patur mishaloshudos. They're exempt from the 3rd meal. So the Shulchan Aruch, in source number 7, he follows this same logic, the same line of reasoning. He writes, Yehe zahir me'od lekayem Sudash Lishit. He says one should be very, very careful, very cautious to fulfill Sudash Lishit, to fulfill that 3rd meal. Even if you're full, you can still fulfill this mitzvah eating the volume of an egg of bread. Even if you're full, you could have some room to eat a little bit more, and so you should eat a little bit more. Whether it's a deoraita, whether it's a derabban, whether it's biblical, whether it's rabbinic, whether it's just like a really important rabbinic mitzvah, the Shulchan Aruch is saying you should do your best. You should be careful. You should be very careful to make sure you fulfill this mitzvah and eat this, egg size. Right? Eat a small amount, enough that you can say that you ate something. And if you can't eat anything at all, you don't have to cause yourself discomfort. Meaning, and this is, we just finished eating. I can't. It would be painful for me to eat another. For me to wash and have another meal. I can't do that. If you're going to be that far, Shulchan Aruch says we're not going to be mitzvah you. I'm not going to cause pain to you. Okay, if you're really mitzvah if it's really painful for you, okay, you're exempt. But he says, "Chacham einav berosho." A wise person, right? His eyes are in his head, meaning you think forward. It's not like you'd ever heard about Sudash Lishi. It's not like comes 4:00 p.m. You're like, oh my gosh, we're gonna have another meal. I had no idea we had another meal. Shulchan Aruch says, there's going to be a third meal. And so this is a mitzvah. Okay, if you overate lunch and now you don't have an appetite right now, okay, I'm not going to force you. Not going to force you to be mitzvah yourself. Shulchan Aruch says you got to plan ahead. You can plan ahead. You want to fulfill this mitzvah, maybe derabanan, maybe deoraita. There's a mitzvah to be fulfilled. Think ahead. So maybe don't have that additional piece of kugel. Maybe don't have that additional, hold yourself back that you can fulfill the mitzvah of Sudash Lishit. Okay. You can't. But if you can plan ahead, it's important to plan ahead. It's interesting. There's in source number 8, Rabbi Dr. Isidore Twersky passed away in the 1990s. He's a major. I think he married the daughter of Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik. He himself is the father of Rabbi Meir Twersky. He teaches at Yeshiva University. Rabbi Dr. Isidore Twersky was a professor at Harvard, I believe. He was a Rebbe. He was a very impressive individual, merging multiple worlds. There was recently a book of Divrei Torah of his published called Torah of the Mind, Torah of the Heart. And it's a compilation of Divrei Torah that he gave during Sudash Lishit. And so someone took notes and they published it into a book. So in the introduction, it sort of talks about Sudash Lishit in general. And this is a line that's in the introduction on page 15 of that book. It says, parenthetically, the Talmud Rebbe explains the designation of the third Shabbos meal as Shaloshudos. It's sort of funny, rather than the grammatically correct Sudash Lishit, right? If you think from a Hebrew perspective, grammatically correct, Sudah Rishonah, Sudah Shmiyah, Sudah Shlishit. Sudah Rishonah, the first meal. Sudah Shmiyah, the second meal. Sudah Shlishit, the third meal. That would make sense. For some reason, we call it Shaloshudos, which literally means 3 meals. The Rebbe was saying, where do we get this from? It's one of these things I guess never really thought about. Right? Hey, you call it Shaloshudos. Why is it Shaloshudos? So that's Sudah Shlishit in Yiddish. So Talmud Rebbe said there's something behind that language, that designation. He says there's a rabbinic mitzvah. So here he's going rabbinic. There is a rabbinic mitzvah to eat 3 meals to honor Shabbos. However, we would eat the first 2 sudos, Friday night dinner and Shabbos lunch, in any case, to satisfy our hunger. By partaking of the third meal, we demonstrate our intention to honor Shabbos through the mitzvah of eating 3 meals. The third meal thus casts light on our motive for the earlier 2. In that sense, it represents Shalosh Sudos. It represents all 3 meals. Right? There's something special because we would already eat Friday night. We would already eat Shabbos morning. The question is, would we eat Sudash Lishit? And the fact that we eat Sudash Lishit, or the fact that we hold ourselves back maybe, that we don't eat our fill on at Shabbos morning, so that we can eat Seudat Shlishit, demonstrates that we're not just eating because we're hungry. We're eating because we want to fulfill this mitzvah Seudat Shlishit. We want to give honor to Shabbat. It's actually, this is for those who are at Mincha Mariv today. Between Mincha Mariv, Rabbi Bergman was talking about how we honor Shabbos with the food that we prepare before Shabbat. It's the same idea, right? Are we getting special food for Shabbat because we just want to have good food? Or as Rabbi Bergman was saying, as the Talmud Rebbe is saying, we're having the meals on Shabbat in order to bring honor and glory to Shabbat and to Hashem. And so do that for Seudat Shlishit also. And if that means you don't have a second piece of kugel, you don't have a second helping of cholent on Shabbos morning, you hold back at Kiddush, hold back at Kiddush, because you're doing it not for your own stomach, but you're doing it in order to fulfill a mitzvah, in order to bring honor, to recognize Hashem, to recognize Shabbat. It's an important idea to keep in mind, even if it's difficult. That's why we're doing it. We're not doing Seudat Shlishit for food. We're doing it to honor Shabbat. So what do we do though? So you're there and you held back as much as you could. You only had a little bit of challah, you had a little bit of cholent, you had one piece of chicken, but still, I finished eating. Lunch ran late. It hasn't been that long since I finished eating. I don't have.
What about breakfast? What about breakfast?
I'm sorry?
What about breakfast?
Interesting question. What about breakfast? The question is, what about breakfast? So it's an interesting question. Well, we're not going to go down that road right now. But
isn't that a meal though?
Yes, it is a meal. For our purposes right now, we're going to, because there's a what to be said about a pre-davening meal, right? Once you daven, then you have to make kiddush. You're in the realm of lunchtime. You're in the realm of second meal. You're saying, could you bump it up earlier? It's an interesting question. We're not going to go in there right now, but we're going to say that you can't do that because of maybe some technicalities. But it's a really good question, and maybe at the end we could talk about ways to sort of life hack this and find a way to make that work. Although I'm not sure they would actually be so doable, but it's a good question.
Rabbi,
what's the status of breakfast? Yeah.
Rabbi, maybe Seudat Shlishit also is very important in how in what you eat, because if you're eating lunch, okay, after you come from shul, you're eating presumably a meat lunch, right? Now, if we have Seudat Shlishit early, there's a question of kashrut, and you have to abide by the rules of kashrut. So Seudat Shlishit, say in the winter time, early afternoon or mid-afternoon or whatever it is, you don't have the 6 hours, and you have to eat a meal that's parv. So it's making this Seudat Shlishit an important event because you're also bringing in kashrut.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, during the winter months, forget about 6 hours. You might not even, if you hold 3 hours, you might not even hit the 3 hour mark. Seudat Shlishit can be, it's not easy. If you have meat and you want to have dairy for Seudat Shlishit, that's what the Shulchan Aruch says. You got to plan ahead. You got to realize that you're probably not going to be able to have dairy at Seudat Shlishit if you just had meat for your second meal, which we'll assume you did, although it's not necessarily the case. But it's a good point. So what do you eat then for Seudat Shlishit? So the Shulchan Aruch, source number 9, he says, "Sarich la'asoto b'pat." You have to use bread, right? Similar to what we saw the Rambam had said earlier, where he said, "Look, this meal is like every other meal on Shabbat. Everyone's going to agree. You have bread for Friday night. You had bread for Shabbat morning. You have bread for Seudat Shlishit. You got to use bread." Yesh Omrim, he says, there are those that say, there are those that say that you can have it with any of the foods that are made from the 5 types of grain: wheat, barley, oats, rye, spelt. ויש אומרים שיכול לעשות אותה בדברים שמלאפתים בהן את הפת, כבשר ודגים. And there are those who say that when they use things that go with bread, such as it doesn't mean here, but it's supposed to say meat, meat and fish, but not fruit. Those are things that you eat with bread. You'll have some, put some, I don't know, tuna on a piece of bread. That's what you eat. Meat or fish, but not fruit. ויש אומרים שאפילו פירות. There are those that say that you could even do fruit. יכול לעשות אותה. You could do it even with fruit. The svara rishonat yikar. But the correct, what the Shulchan Aruch thinks is the correct opinion, shetzarich la'asotah b'pat, if you do it with bread, ela imken, yitzaver beyoser. Unless you are really full. Right? If you're not going to be able to stomach anything, and it's either bread or nothing, or it's either fruit or nothing, do the fruit. But if you have a choice, dump it up. Right? We want to have the best that we can for this meal because it's a real meal. And that's what the Shulchan Aruch says. Really, we should be doing our very best. And I think that's the best way to phrase it, right? We should be doing our very best to have a real meal for Seudat Shlishit. Real meal in the eyes of the rabbis means bread. If we can't do bread, next down the ladder is mizonot. You can't do mizonot, next down the ladder would be meat or fish, right? These are things that are real meals. Can't do that, so do fruit. But you should have something. And just parenthetically, where does this idea come from of not having bread, right? If we're saying it has to be a meal, so where does the idea of not having bread come from? So I believe it comes from this passage, the discussion about it comes from this passage in Masechet Sukkah, source number 10. There's a Mishnah that says, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Arba Esrei Sudot Chayav Adam Lechol Basukah. A person should eat 14 meals, and we're talking about the holiday of Sukkot. A person should eat 14 meals in their sukkah, assuming weather permitting, etc. Achat bayom, achat balayla, one at night and one during the day, right? 7 days of Sukkot in Israel. So we have 2 meals, one in the morning, one in the evening, 14 meals. Chachamim omrim, ein l'davar kitzvah, there's no set number here. Chutz rishon, b'yom tov rishon shel chag levad. No, you just have to make sure you eat a meal in the sukkah that first night, but otherwise you don't really have to eat anything in the sukkah. And then the Gemara continues in source number 10, the second half. Tanya Namihasi, in Hishlim b'minei targima yatsa. The Talmud quotes a Baraita that says, how do you get to these 14 meals? Do you have to eat bread for all these 14 meals? There's an opinion in the Talmud that says you don't have to have bread. You can have minei targima. The way that the Steinsaltz English Sefaria translation is types of delicacies, right? So you can fulfill the 14 meals in the sukkah with delicacies. And there's a huge discussion over what a delicacy is. Does a delicacy mean bread? Or maybe a delicacy means just mizonot, wheat, barley, oat, rye, cakes. Or maybe delicacy means fish and meat. Or maybe delicacy means cooked fruit. Or maybe just means raw, plain fruit. And there's a whole discussion among the later authorities, what does minei targima, what does types of delicacies mean? But they all say, if it's good enough for the sukkah, the meal for the sukkah, then it's got to be good enough for Seudat Shlishit at the very least. And so this idea that the Shulchan Aruch quotes, where he goes down this list of maybe bread, or maybe mizonot, like cakes, maybe meat or fish, or maybe fruit, all of that stems from what are types of delicacies. If it's good enough for the sukkah, it must be good enough for Seudat Shlishit. And so the bottom line, though, going back to source number 9, the bottom line, it's 4 p.m., it's time for Seudat Shlishit, I don't have an appetite. What do I do? So the Shulchan Aruch will tell you, you should have planned ahead. Make sure to leave some room. And so that's what I try to do when I know Seudat Shlishit is going to be hard for me to eat. I try to hold back a little bit. If I forget to, or I try to, but you finish eating and you think you have room, and then 30 minutes later you realize that you're actually full. So now it's Seudat Shlishit. The Shulchan Aruch gives us a list of options. We either ideally to have bread. Can't have an egg size of bread, have some cake. Can have some cake, have a pizza, I don't know, have some tuna, have a little bit of deli. Can't have that, have a little bit of fruit. And if you really can't even stomach the fruit, well, then I guess we go back. We're not going to force you to mitzvah yourself. We're not going to force you to make yourself uncomfortable. If you really can't even eat a pear, you can't eat an apple, then don't eat anything. But just know, going back to how we started, we're this close to fulfilling maybe even a biblical mitzvah. So it's a reminder that we should, when we have our Suda on Shabbat, on Shabbat morning, to make sure that we keep a little bit of room to allow us to eat something for Suda Shlishit. So that's our Suda Shlishit discussion. Any questions on that before we move on to the second part, which is going to be about the Malava Malka?
Rabbi, I have a question. It's Marcy.
Yes.
I was just wondering, you don't have to say Kiddush at Shaloshudos. Is that because you've
Correct.
already blessed the day at lunch? Is that why?
Yeah. So there's a line. I took it out. I replaced it with an ellipses. I think on source number 6. So Rambam, after that ellipses, Rambam says that one recites Kiddush. And I actually have a sidur that gives you the language of Kiddush. There's a little bit of a discussion whether Kiddush is necessary for Suda Shlishit or not. I don't know anyone. There probably are many very holy people who make Kiddush for Suda Shlishit. I've never met anyone who does. I've never made it myself. And I'll be honest, I've never really spent enough time looking into the reason why it's not necessary, but I would imagine it has to do with exactly what you just said, meaning we've already made Kiddush on Shabbat morning. We've already sort of, and the Kiddush already on Shabbat morning is already, I don't want to say insignificant, but it's already a stretch, let's say, that it's necessary, that it's not even such a big deal like Friday night is. So it sort of goes lower and lower during the day. So I think what you said, Marcy, I think is probably a good answer. That you already made it really earlier in the day, so you don't have to. But you should know it is in the books. There are those that say, Rambam famously says one should recite Kiddush for Suda Shlishit. But as I said, I don't know anyone who does that.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Any other questions on Suda Shlishit before we move on?
What happens, Rabbi, when there's a Shabbos during Sukkot? When there's a Shabbos.
Oh, you're saying it says 14 meals?
Plus
14
1.
meals, not 15 meals?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a discussion. Next time we'll maybe in a little less than a year from now we'll have a shir on Sukkot about how to understand that Mishnah and the Gemara. Yeah, there's what to say. But good observation. I was hoping no one would catch that, but can't get anything past you. Good observation. Okay, so that's Suda Shlishit. So in the summer, Suda Shlishit is I'd say relatively easy to accomplish because you could have a window of 6 hours between when you finish lunch and when it's time for Suda Shlishit. And Suda Shlishit is just dinner in the summer, not a big deal. In the winter, that's harder. But what's hard in the summer is this idea of Malava Malka, having a meal post Shabbat. That's hard over the summer, but during the winter, I think we've got, I don't know what time Shabbat ends next week, but you got like hours and hours and hours to do this Malava Malka, to have a meal after Shabbat. So even though during the winter months, Suda Shlishit is very difficult, Malava Malka is very easy. And so I thought we should take a couple minutes to just explore what this mitzvah, not as known, this long lost cousin of Suda Shlishit, this idea of Malava Malka. So very close to where we established the obligation to have 3 meals on Shabbat, we have this, source number 11. Amar Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says, Le'olam yesader adam shulchano be'erev Shabbat, aval pi she'eno tzarich ela kazayit. A person should always make sure when they come getting ready for Shabbat, you set your table appropriately. Even if you're only going to have an olive side, you're going to have a very, very small meal. You put out the tablecloth, you get out the fine china, you get everything out, you make it look nice, even if you're only having a little bit. You should enter into Shabbat with a nice, beautiful table setting. Amar Rabbi Chanina, Le'olam yesader adam shulchano b'motzei Shabbat, afal pi she'eno tzarich ela kazayit. Again, a person should always set his table at the conclusion of Shabbat on Saturday night for a feast in deference to the Shabbat that passed, even if he only needs to set the table for an olive bulk of food. And so here we have this idea of having a 4th meal on Saturday night. And this is not Rabbi Chidka's 4th meal. This is a meal that takes place after Shabbat. We have from the Talmud, source number 11, this idea of making sure that we have a meal after Shabbat. And this is quoted in the Shulchan Aruch in source number 12. Le'olam yisader adam shulchano b'motzei Shabbat. Person should always make sure to set the table for after Shabbat. Why? Kedei lavot et haShabbat, to escort the Shabbat. Afilu eino tzarich el lekazai. Even if you only need to have just a small little bit, it's important to set the table to honor the Shabbat, right? By escorting it out with Malav and Malka. Source number 13, bottom of page, towards the bottom, halfway down on page 3. The Aruch HaShulchan, we saw him earlier. He's the one who said that Seudat Shlishit is somewhere between the Oraita and the Rabbanan. This, by the way, everyone is going to agree this is a rabbinic initiative of Malav and Malka. And here's what the Aruch HaShulchan says about it. It says, Tam Seudat Zo, the reason for this meal, Katav HaRambam, Maimonides writes, Kedei lechabed HaShabbat, V'knisato u'v'tziato, to honor Shabbat in its entrance and its exit. It's very beautiful. We sing songs, we get all dressed nice for Friday. When Shabbat comes, we sing Shalom Aleichem, we sing beautiful songs because the Shabbat queen came. But we should do the same when the Shabbat queen leaves. The Rambam says, we mechabed Shabbat b'knisato, when Shabbat enters, v'tziato, when Shabbat exits. Lomar, zehu kemalave et hamelech bechavod suda. That's like escort, honoring the king with a meal. V'lachen nikret suda zo malav and malka, and that's why we call this meal malav and malka, which literally means escorting the queen, because that's what we're doing. We're escorting Shabbat out. And so he writes that this is out in the ellipses, but he says, therefore, we should try to fulfill the mitzvah of malav and malka as early to Havdalah as we can, because we're escorting it out. We're saying, welcome Shabbat on Friday night, and then on Saturday night, we're saying, Seichem Shalom, have a good week, Shabbat queen. We'll see you on Friday night. Right, so we're escorting it out, and we're making a party to escort the queen of Shabbat out. And the Aruch HaShulchan here adds a fun little piece. I don't know, fun. It's an interesting piece here. It says V'katvu. So they say. Who's the they? Mystics. They say, She'amru Chachamim. They write that the rabbis say, Sheyesh Ever Echad Be'adam, Ushmo Niskoi, V'yeshamrim Luz. There is a bone, there is a limb, there is a part of the human body called the Niskoi, or called the Luz, some say. There's a specific part of the body. Ve'eno nehene mishum achila. It doesn't take any nutrition. It doesn't gain any benefit except for Ella me'achilat motzei Shabbat. Kedei lavot et Shabbat. The only time that you can give nutrients, you can sustain this luz, this niskoi, this part of your body, is with a meal on Saturday night in order to escort Shabbat out. And this is not just any part of the body. Mimenu, the Aruch HaShulchan writes, that these mystics write, Mimenu yichyeh ha'adam v'et ha'tzichiyah. This limb is the limb from which a person will be resurrected. Right? In Tchiyat HaMeitim, there's the luz, the niskoi bone that doesn't disintegrate. It's always there. It remains. And from there, a body will be rebuilt, will be reconstituted during Tchiyat HaMeitim, during the resurrection of the dead in the times of Mashiach, times of Messiah. Aruch HaShulchan is saying, this is a really important thing. If we hope, we wait, we talk about Mechayeh HaMeitim, we wait for the time of the resurrection of the dead. Aruch HaShulchan says, that means you got to have something there to be resurrected. So you should probably make sure that your luz bone, your nitkui bone, is properly, there's no over-the-counter vitamin to take to make sure this is strong. You just got to eat Seudat Shlishit. That's the Aruch HaShulchan said. And by the way, I'll just add, according to everything, this mitzvah certainly of Seudat Shlishit, but even of Malav and Malka, I see no reason for us to make a distinction between men and women for either of these. Certainly for Seudat Shlishit, it's one of the mitzvot of the day of Shabbat. But even for Malav and Malka, there doesn't seem to be any reason that it would be unique only to a man, especially if there's some more mystical, Kabbalistic reason that you would need to eat Seudah Shlishit, to eat Malav Malka would be very important to make sure that everyone fulfills this mitzvah of Malav Malka. And as he concludes here, this piece, he says, Rabim ein nikarim b'seudah zo. Many people are not careful about this mitzvah. And it's true in his time, and it's probably true in our time. A lot of us, okay, Shabbos ends. I eat a lot on Shabbos. I don't want to eat so much on Saturday night. So Aruch HaShulchan is saying, behind Makayimah, Karo Meruba. The one who fulfills it has great reward. And if Yirei Elokim, those who fear God, those who fear Hashem, they want to make sure to fulfill mitzvot, they want to make sure to give the proper kavod to Shabbat, to Hashem, they strive to fulfill it and eat at the very least an olive size. Right? Similar to how we're looking at Seudah Shlishit. You should really try to eat something. So Malav Malka, you should really try to eat something. It's good to eat meat if you can. If you can't eat meat, so have fish. And that's because that's also considered a good meal. Or nice fruit if you have them. You should have them with bread. And if you can't have any bread, you should have mizonot, you should have cakes or perot, fruit. It's actually it's amazing that the cadence that we saw with Seudah Shlishit, start with this, you can't do this, and it goes less and less. We see the same sort of formulation and language here in Aruch HaShulchan about Malav Malka. So to give you a sense of what we're dealing with, Malav Malka is not some it doesn't really matter. But this is a beautiful mitzvah. It's a way to honor Shabbat. It's a way to say, to hold on to the beauty of Shabbat just a little bit longer, to thank Hashem for Shabbat, to give kavod to the day. And so hold on to it with a meal. And again, as the Aruch HaShulchan says, we have many options. The ideal is to have a real meal. If we can't have a real meal, it's best to try to find something that we can have, whether it's cakes, whether it's fruit, whether it's meat or fish. I think, I've never been, but that's the pizza place over here. I'm blanking on the name. The line is out the door with high school students. The pizza shop over there, a lot of places down on Bathurst and Lawrence that one can get food on a Saturday night. And so I think it's a great opportunity to fulfill this mitzvah. And I think, especially now as we're entering into the winter months, we have many opportunities to fulfill this mitzvah of Malav Malka, and we ought to do our best to do that. So today, we've seen two different pieces. Shabbat during the winter. Number one, we talked about Seudah Shlishit. And Seudah Shlishit, hard during the winter, not a lot of time. So best case scenario, plan ahead, and that way you can have Seudah Shlishit. If you can't, so we saw there's a tier of what's either bread, or if not that, then cakes, or fruit at the very, and if you can't have anything, you really can't put any more food in your body, then I guess don't force yourself to eat it. That's for Seudah Shlishit. Malav Malka though, same type of thing. Really, we should have it. If we can't have it, we can't have bread, so have some meat. Can't have meat, have some fruit, have some cake. But now, that we have hours and hours of Saturday nights, it's something I think Malav Malka is a mitzvah that we could all accomplish, in the best, maximal possible way. And that's something, even if we're sort of short on the Seudah Shlishit, to beautify, to be mehader the mitzvah of Malav Malka is something that we really have the opportunity to do in these winter Shabbatot.
Rabbi,
any last questions? Yes.
Does a hot dog between the second and third period of the hockey game qualify? Saturday night?
I guess so. On Saturday night, I guess so. Yeah, why not?
Most opinions say you only eat oats if you have it between the first and second period, Paul.
It depends if Maple Leafs are winning or not, I think.
You need to be with a group of people to do this, or could you do this on your own?
I don't know of anyone who says that you do need. I mean, we have this principle, the Rov Am Hadrat Melech. We always try to do whatever we can. We try to do in a large group because the more people you have, whether it's referring to davening or whether it's referring to a meal, whatever it is, we try to make sure we have large groups of people because that's glory to Hashem. I think it's a beautiful thing to say that one should try to have Malav and Malka with someone else. You're trying to honor Shabbat, you're trying to honor Hashem, do it with someone else. I think it's a beautiful idea. But I'm not sure that I don't know of anyone who says that it specifically has to be, with 3 people or with the minyan. I think it's a beautiful idea, but I don't know that one has to bend over backwards to do that. I'd say sooner, come to shul for mincha and mariv, and then you'll catch Malav and Malka on your own later. I'd say that's the hierarchy there on a Saturday night.
Is that the same for Shaloshudos too?
Yeah, I don't know anyone who would say that Seudat Lashit should be with a group. Of course, come to Shari Shemayim for mincha, stay for Seudat Lashit. Got some good food, some challah, some hummus, some cakes, some salads. Sometimes there's leftover cholent or kugel. There's a nice spread at Seudat Lashit in the shul, and you're welcome to come. It's outside right now. The tent is heated. There's some great opportunities to have Seudat Lashit in the company of others. But strictly speaking, I don't think that one would be required to have Seudat Lashit with other people. But still, come to shul. It's nice. All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming and for learning. And we'll conclude next week is going to be the third of 3. We're going to be talking about the 18 minutes, the most productive time in our week. Those 18 minutes between when the calendar says Shabbat candlelighting is and when sunset is. Some of the details that surround the 18 minutes, candle lighting, what happens if you realize that you're about to light candles, you realize that, it's minute number 19, how to deal with things like that, and making the best of those very short moments when Shabbat starts, 20 minutes after you get home from work on Friday afternoon. That'll be next week. So thank you everyone for coming and for learning, and I look forward to seeing you on Shabbat and next week as well.
Koach, shekoach.